Accusations of corruption against top government officials. President Buhari directs Attorney General to investigate and prosecute offenders.
Senate President directs Senate Committee on Power to hold public hearing on drop in power generation in the country.
German Ministry of Defense warns Nigeria over threats posed by maritime insecurity in the Gulf of Guinea.
And on Good Morning Nigeria today, we shall continue our discussion of Nigeria's economic outlook for 2017. Of course, this is the third part, with special focus on the interplay of monetary and fiscal policies.
Yes, government's priorities in 2017 as contained in the budget estimates will be a continuation of our 2016 plans, but adjusted to reflect new additions made in the economic recovery and growth plan. Well, this is aimed at restoring growth, a key objective of the federal government towards bringing about stability and greater coherence between monetary, fiscal and trade policies, while of course guaranteeing security for all.
Well, as a result, monetary and fiscal authorities need to initiate growth-driven policies in order to diversify the economy and create jobs, with particular emphasis on agriculture, manufacturing, solid minerals, and the services sector. Now, with the nation's budget based on an exchange rate of 305 naira to $1, the Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, will no doubt play a critical role in ensuring stability of the naira against international currencies, in addition, of course, to dealing with the lending and inflationary pressures.
Well, on the other end, to meet the laudable economic projections of President Buhari in 2017, the fiscal authorities must be proactive, because experience in Nigeria actually illustrates the difficulties of implementing fiscal policies, well, with an environment such highly volatile revenue flows, resulting in strong deficit bias over the years.
Well, Blessing, it will be interesting to see how things will work out now as the economic projection in 2017, apart from the borrowing plan, envisages an aggregate revenue to fund the federal budget at about 4.94 trillion naira. Now, this is 28% higher than the 2016 full-year projections. Now, oil for 2017 is also projected to contribute 1.985 trillion of the amount already budgeted for 2017. Now, non-oil revenues, on the other hand, are estimated to be worth about 1.4 trillion naira, with about 807 billion naira coming from independent revenues and other sources, contributing in total about 2 trillion naira.
Well, quite right, Kingsley. Over the years, the monetary and fiscal authorities appear to work at cross purposes, with the nation's economic being the worst for it. Well, as each work to exert its influence on the economy, it's also given rise to divergent opinions at different times amongst experts, of which some of the monetary and fiscal authorities actually exert this greater impact on economic activity. But however, it remains the consensus that the mixture of both policies will actually enhance better performance in a developing economy like that of Nigeria.
Well, the Central Bank of Nigeria, that's the CBN, usually through its monetary policies, regulates the amount of money in circulation, the interest rate, and of course, the functions of the credit markets as well as the banking system. While the fiscal authorities, on the other hand, through macroeconomic policies and structural reforms, strive to stimulate the economy in order to create wealth, generate jobs, as well as ensure inclusive growth.
Well, despite all the harsh realities, as we continue our focus on Nigeria's economic outlook for 2017, what monetary and fiscal policies will drive the projection, or could drive the projection towards economic recovery and growth? These and also other questions will be answered by experts in the studio at the time of our discussion, and also our viewer could participate as well through our Twitter handle at NTAGMN. Well, on that note, I welcome you to Good Morning Nigeria. So today, the first for the working week. My name is Blessing Abu.
And on that note, also, I'd like to welcome Blessing back from well-deserved vacation. You look very well rested.
Thank you very much, Kingsley.
All right, I'm Kingsley Osadolo. I join my colleague Blessing Abu in welcoming you also to today's edition of Good Morning Nigeria, reaching you as always live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. We're Africa's largest television network. Now, in the course of the program, we shall, of course, bring you our regular companion segments, including Newspaper Review, Business, Sports, and others. In the meantime, we're going over to the newsroom, and our guide this morning is Anne Jibuno. Hi, Anne.
Hello, Kingsley. Good morning, Blessing. Good morning, Nigeria. Here's the news. The attention of the presidency has been drawn to a number of reports in the media in which various accusations of corruption have been leveled against some top officials in the administration. In a statement by the senior special assistant to the president on media and publicity, Garba Shehu, President Buhari has instructed the Attorney General of the Federation to investigate the involvement of any top government officials accused of any wrongdoing. If any of them are liable, they will not escape prosecution. Former military president, General Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida, has felicitated with President Muhammadu Buhari on his 74th birthday, praying Allah to strengthen him as he leads the country to prosperity. He said at 74, President Buhari has proven his commitment to nation building, as demonstrated by his continued commitment to the overall development and greatness of the nation. General Babangida reiterated that at his new age, he has no doubt that the president will continue to exhibit enough wisdom to sustain the good work he is doing for the country. The former military president said President Buhari's 74 years have been remarkable for Nigeria and mankind in the areas of service and patriotism. General Babangida also said the president has done well, especially at this time that he is tackling the challenges confronting the nation in a bid to make it stronger. Speaker of the House of Representatives, Yakubu Dogara, has congratulated the President of the Senate, Dr. Abubakar Bukola Saraki, as he marks his 54th birthday. The Speaker also hailed Saraki for piloting the affairs in the Senate to be an active and progressive partner of the House of Representatives in providing legislative solutions to the nation's problems. A statement from the Office of the Speaker adds that the legislators look forward to continuing cooperation and seamlessness in National Assembly activities in their service to Nigerians. And the Senate President Bukola Saraki has directed the Senate Committee on Power, Steel Development and Metallurgy to hold a public hearing on the declining electricity generation in the country, which currently dropped to 3,000 megawatts from 7,000 megawatts. A statement by the media office of the Senate President says the public hearing is to verify the claims and counterclaims of non-remittance of revenues between the Nigeria Bulk Electricity Trading Company, electricity distribution companies, and generation companies. It will also scrutinize how the Central Bank of Nigeria disbursed the 213 billion naira intervention fund to the power sector and the role of the Bureau of Public Enterprise. The Minister of Budget and National Planning, Senator Udo Udoma, will address the media today on the highlights of the 2017 budget prospects to the National Assembly by Mr. President. The media briefing, which will take place at the Conference Hall, State House, Abuja, begins at 11 o'clock. Invited to the media briefing are heads of government ministries, departments and agencies, representatives of states and local governments, private sectors and associations, captains of industry, civil society groups, and other relevant organizations. Empowerment, effective participation, and leadership of women is encountering insecurity in the West African sub-region, featured prominently as ECOWAS and Sahel regions mark the 2016 Open Day on Gender, Women and Peace and Security in Abuja. Justin Bem Unyi reports that the event, jointly organized by the United Nations, ECOWAS and other partners, has the contribution of rural women and youth to security and development as its theme.
Let us see more women in our cabinets, in key positions, not talking positions. Let us see more women in corporate West Africa, corporate Nigeria, corporate Senegal, corporate Côte d'Ivoire.
And why we are saying major stakeholders in this fight for peace and security is the fact that whenever there's crisis, women bear the brunt, women and children bear the brunt. We are most hit by war, peace, and lack of peace, lack of security, and terrorism. What I think is very unique in terms of Nigeria, the achievement that we have made in terms of 1325 and other related resolutions, is the fact that we have taken it to the state level.
And experts have advocated more investment in nomadic education in Nigeria. This is to assist in promoting self-reliance and reading among millions of pupils across the country. They made this known at an interactive and training session organized by the National Commission for Nomadic Education.
I want to pursue that vision and to do my best within that period to bring nomadic education to the forefront of basic education in Nigeria, and make sure that each and every child that is, every nomadic child that is out of school is enrolled in school.
I'm very happy to see that nomadic education is alive and well, populated by very exuberant and interested officials and by exuberant and interested staff. That will keep it going.
The Borno state government has solicited more support and assistance towards rebuilding the communities ravaged by insurgency in the state. The state governor, Kashim Shettima, made the plea in a message to the presentation of materials to Bama by Victim Support Fund. The German Minister of Defense, Ursula von der Leyen, says Nigeria's economy and that of other countries in the Gulf of Guinea may be threatened if maritime security within the region is not addressed. She stated this in Abuja while on a visit to the ECOWAS Commission.
The German business community has mutual interests here in Nigeria too, to have a strong partner. So it's in our common interest to support ECOWAS. We're sharing interests because Nigeria is a country with a strong economy, and it needs to import and export via the sea. Therefore, the access to the sea is important. And the German business community has mutual interests here in Nigeria too, to have a strong partner. So it's in our common interest to support ECOWAS.
So the government of Germany is helping us with the establishment and equipping of those centers.
Well, that's the news at this time. The rest of the program continues with Kingsley and Blessing.
All right, thank you very much there, and Jibuno, for the news package. Of course, next for us now will be to focus on the business segment of Good Morning Nigeria.
Global food security monitors have said that Nigeria's Borno state was at increased risk of famine, with one study projecting the number of those affected will rise to 115,000 in 2017, up from 55,000 this year. The northeastern state is the area worst hit by the 7-year-old Boko Haram insurgency that has killed 15,000 people and uprooted more than 2 million. The Integrated Food Security Phase Classification (IPC), which is backed by UN and other aid agencies, issued a special alert calling for urgent humanitarian action. However, Minister of Agriculture, Aljube, has been reassuring Nigerians of efforts aimed at ensuring food security in the country, tracing the lags and policy framework put in place to address the fear of famine in the country.
Knowledge is lacking. new research we did here on soil-specific fertilizer types, crop-specific fertilizer types, have resulted in yields on the farm of more up from 2 tons of rice per hectare to 7.5. We're still working. With the new arrangement with Morocco, we intend in the next 2-3 years to achieve about 10 tons of rice per hectare, about the same of maize. So policy inconsistency, the neglect by governments, and sometimes policy somersaults. What we avoided when we came in was not to shift from the policy he left behind, because it was a good policy, supporting the farmers with improved seeds, reaching out to them, making sure they had credit. It accentuated with the support we got from the CBN.
He also attributed the fear to massive food exports to neighboring countries and assured that food supply and availability will increase in the northeastern part of the country, where the military has been doing a good job of repelling the insurgents. A convergence of experts and policymakers in agriculture around the world is making a case for women empowerment in agriculture for improved yields. During a high-level event at the Food and Agriculture FAO headquarters in Rome, Princess Victoria of Sweden said if female farmers were given access to the same resources as their male counterparts, food production could be increased by as much as 20 to 30%. The meeting at the weekend focused on gender equality and the role and empowerment of rural women to fight hunger and malnutrition. The Crown Princess of Sweden spoke on the key role rural women play in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and the important roles of gender equality in ending hunger.
And that would mean saving about 100 to 150 million people from living in hunger. In building a sustainable future, rural women represent a resource that we simply cannot afford to overlook.
FAO's Director General Jose Graciano da Silva noted that achieving gender equality and empowering women is not only the right thing to do, but is a critical ingredient in the fight against extreme poverty, hunger, and malnutrition.
This is a crucial sector in which almost 45% of the labor force is formed by women. This figure rise to 60% in Africa and Asia.
He pointed out the crucial role of rural women to achieving all the Sustainable Development Goals, but especially as DG2, freeing the world from hunger and malnutrition. The high-level event focused on the larger context of maintaining global momentum for gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls through 2016 to 2017 and beyond. With Business News, I'm Leah Katung. Baba today.
Thank you very much, Leah Katung Babatunde. I'll take that break to bring some messages, and it will be time to take a look at what stories are trending on the front pages of newspapers today.
If you hear a bomb explosion or gunshots of an active shooter, that might be a terror attack. At such times, always remember 3 action words: run, hide, report. Don't try to run towards the terror scene to save the situation, because there might be a second bomb blast or another attack. Run far away and take cover. Make sure you are safe first. Yes, it is in our nature to sympathize over the hurt, but remember, only trained personnel can help in such situations. When in a secured environment, promptly call relevant authorities and help will come. For anonymous reporting, call 09630-3250-5 or 0813-2222-106. If you see something, say something. Nigeria, unite against terrorism. This message is brought to you by the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
Whenever pain occurs, you want quick relief. Try new Nurofen Express. It goes to the source of pain and gets to work in under 15 minutes. That's why Nurofen Express delivers fast and effective relief. New Nurofen Express works at the source of pain, fast.
Being a mom is great, but when your child has a fever, you don't know what to do. I trust Nurofen for Children to take care of my child's pain and fever.
Effective relief you can trust.
Hear the call of change. Stand up, Nigeria. Change is here and it's going to stay. Change begins with you. Oh yeah, make we go. Go to so let the change begin from within. Look at you, Ogerola. Change begins with you and me. Change begins with me. Change begins with me. Change begins with
All right, you're welcome back. But if you just joined us, it's Good Morning Nigeria, and you're watching us on the Nigerian Television Authority. Next for us now is a review of the headlines in some of today's newspapers.
Here's Bayo Toibi to do just that with us in the studio this morning. Good morning to you, Bayo.
Good morning, Blessing. Good to see you. Welcome back.
Good to see you.
Kingsley.
Glad to be back.
Good morning, Nigeria.
Okay, Kingsley.
All right, yeah, let's begin with the Daily Sun. Daily Sun has as its lead anti-corruption war. That's the kicker. Buhari orders SGF and Mangu's probe. SGF stands for Secretary of Government of the Federation, and Mangu is the acting chair of the EFCC. Two riders. Senate committee's report on state of EFCC offices damning, and President gets resolution rejecting acting chair this week. Now that's the lead story on the riders. Now there's an earpiece just beside the nameplate of Daily Sun. It says cabinet reshuffle likely in first quarter 2017. Details of that story can be found on page 8. Now below the photograph on the front page you have other headlines. 20 killed in Taraba farms. That's on page 5 in greater detail. Unconfirmed report indicates Shekau's, quote, capture, unquote. And a writer says, area surrounded by troops last week, says military source. Nupeng begins 3-day strikes January the 9th. Again, that story is on page 9. And CCB, that's Code of Conduct Bureau, begins verification of governance and ministers' assets.
All right, still in line with the probe you talked about earlier. The Daily Trust has it as its leading headline. Buhari orders AGF, that is the Attorney General of the Federation, to probe top officials. The story starts right there, but continues on page 5. Moving on to other headlines, just below the photograph here. Well, let's talk about the photograph first. It was in the news as well. Is that of the German Minister of Defense, Ursula, the Defense Minister for Nigeria, Brigadier General Mansour Danali, as well as the Minister of Health, Professor Isaac Ajewole, with other senior military and medical officers from both countries. Well, it's actually the donation of a mobile medical care unit and equipment from the German government to the Nigerian Armed Forces at Nnamdi Azikiwe International Airport in Abuja yesterday. That story also is picked up by the Daily Times, just below the photograph you have there on the front page of the Daily Times. Nigeria to get 3 million euros from Germany for military equipment, and that story find on page 12. Well, I think before we take on other stories, let's Bayo come in here.
Yes, thank you, Blessing. Well, the news of the President's directive to the Attorney General of the Federation is reported by many of the newspapers, and it is attributed to the Senior Special Assistant to the President of Media and Publicity, Malam Garba Shehu, and he says that any government official found guilty or liable will not escape prosecution. He says no government official was identified in the 2-paragraph statement issued by the president. But the newspapers are already speculating. Punch speculates that he alludes to 3 key presidential appointees, the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, the Chief of Staff to the President, and the Acting Chairman of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission. Lagos lawyer Femi Falana says that the President had already indicated that there will be no sacred cow, and this is now time to test that assertion. Other areas of speculation is that cabinet reshuffle is imminent in the first quarter of the year, and some of the papers are already speculating that the presidency has already made indication to the Senate, and they are indicating that there could be 10 new cabinet ministers. Already, they are alluding that there are 2 vacancies already, the minister that we lost in the accident, and the Minister for Environment, who are just taking up the appointment at the UN. Already, lobbyists have assailed the presidency, according to another speculating report from the newspaper, to nominate their candidate for the position of the EFCC chairman. Among these, from the report, are former governors, former ministers, and influential politicians. They have been said to be reportedly shunned by the president. Meanwhile, the chairman of the Presidential Advisory Committee Against Corruption, Professor Isasagi, has advised that the acting chairman of the EFCC should be kept because the allegations against him are spurious and lack substance. He adds that it is not surprised that about 10 to 15% of senators were being investigated by EFCC, and therefore you cannot expect them to accept his appointment with a clean mind. The allegations against the chairman, he says, are weak and spurious, and he said that he knows that there are 5th columnists at work, and there is politics in the whole saga.
All right, let's continue with the Authority newspaper. The Authority above the nameplate, 24 killed in fresh Araba violence, that's on page 4. Also on page 4 in greater detail, Rivers violence. I won't participate in police probe. That's according to Wike, who is the governor of the state. FIFA suspends grants to Nigeria. But the lead story has a kicker, $2 billion Abacha loot. Governor Bagudu and wife filed suit to claim seized funds in the U.S. And second lead story below the photograph, excitement as federal government fixes Ikorekmene and Umuahia Highway. The story jumps to page 2.
All right, Kingsley, from the Daily Trust, we'll go back to that. Just below the masthead, we have about 1,000, that's a number, 1,000 bandits surrender in Zamfara. That's where we find on page 5. But moving towards the foot of the page, you have some other stories linked there. PDP Secretariat closed for 7 months now. That story we find on page 37. President won't sign CCT amendment bill. It's coming from Bajabia Mila. That story is trending on page 5. Many killed in Taraba communal clash. The story we find on page 4. But quickly now to the Daily Times. The leading headline for the Daily Times this morning is on the Yuletide. NCAA, that's the Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority, steps up its monitoring of airlines. And 4 riders to that gives a clean bill of health. Air travelers grown under poor services, as well as scarcity of aviation fuel worsens. Air Peace commences flight to you. The other stories, details of the stories as it continues on page 6. But 2 other headlines just below the photograph, and you have that of the power project. Okay, no, I beg your pardon. About 130 transmission projects abandoned since 2002, says official. Rivers, people won't partake in police probe. I think Kingsley took on that story earlier. This is credited to governor of the state. Here's on Wiki. You find that story on page 5. Senate versus SGF. Saraki Dogara should first resign, say Arewa Youth. Bayo.
Yes. There has been mixed reports about the war against insurgency and criminality. In Taraba State, sadly, 20 persons are reported to have died in the clash between farmers and herders. This ironically happened on Taraba Peace Day. Also, there are strong speculations that Shekau, the insurgent leader with 9 lives, have been captured. This time, I think we had a first Shekau, a second Shekau, a third Shekau, and this Shekau now is probably the 4th body double. However, the positive development is in Zamfara State, where we have been assailed by bandits that have been killing people incessantly. About 1,000 such armed bandits are reported to have renounced banditry and surrendered their arms. They did this under the auspices of the Nigerian army and the governor of the state. The camp leader, Samaila Samako Sani, had said the unlawful killing of Fulani by volunteer vigilante group called Yansa Kai had led to the banditry that had led to loss of persons. The state government had, according to him, neglected the Fulani communities, and many of them were being subjected to unreasonable killings. However, the emir of Zurmi, the area, is very happy and elated that this terrible thing is coming to an end. Governor Abdul Aziz Yari has received those who have renounced banditry, and he has assured all of them that herders and farmers and everybody will enjoy the protection of the city. But Rivers State, again, is on the news, particularly the last rerun elections. INEC says it is to instigate an administrative inquiry as part of a review of Rivers rerun. The professor in charge of the commission says that some reports of INEC staff, including absence from duty posts, partisanship, will not be swept under the carpet. Professor Mahmoud Yahya also used the occasion to assert that, particularly dismiss allegations that he is being teleguided by the president. He said, nobody has interfered with his job. I have never been approached by anybody, and nobody has influenced the decision we have taken. He has also appealed to the security agencies. Particularly, he pointed out the areas of concerns. He says that there are reports about disruption of electoral activities on Okrika and Gokana, heavy shooting at Beita and Bodo, hijacking of electoral materials at Andoni, Oibo, and Ogubolu, hostage taking at Akokotoru. These are the areas he says that security agencies should investigate. Meanwhile, the Nigerian police is already one step ahead. A DIG is heading an investigative panel that the Inspector General of Police has appointed to inquire into some of the incidences in the Rivers State crisis. It may be recalled that some 5 persons were arrested for the murder of a senior police officer during that election. Presently, one area of concern is a purported video audio recording that has been gone viral on the social media. The police say that a forensic analysis of the voice will be done, and the voice print will be compared with call data receiver records from telecom company. They are to do this to ascertain the originality of the voice. Governor Nyesom Wike says that his administration and the people of Rivers will not be part of that investigation. He says police cannot murder Rivers people and then turn around to come and investigate.
Leadership newspaper has below its nameplate 2016. Market still under pressure. Equity investors lose 662 billion naira. It also has the PNB orders probe of SGF and others. That's on page 4 in greater detail. But the lead story says federal government begins property audit in MDAs with a rider how ex-Shopee director bolted with 30 vehicles. That story is to be found on page 5. Blessing.
Now, Bayo can come in now.
All right.
Taking most of the story.
Yes, just this last one. With effect from today, petrol tankers are only to travel across Nigeria only at night. The Road Safety Commission is to enforce only night, to prohibit night travel by tanker drivers. This, according to the Corps Marshal, is that most of the accidents occur on the highway are due to poor petroleum haulage transportation, and therefore, with effect from today, no tanker will be allowed to travel the Nigerian highway at night. This, according to him, is beneficial because the petroleum tankers, when each time a tanker is involved in an accident, property and the tanker is worth 50 million is lost. This is done to safeguard life and property.
So
and
they should only be allowed to travel at night?
Only daytime.
Daytime.
Nighttime travel is now prohibited. For
Is there an indication of the hours when night begins to count?
No, there were no indications whether it is to start from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. But the concern actually is not only the traveling at night, also parking, double parking on the highway, particularly on the expressway, is also noted to be dangerous. And overtures made by state government and the Federal Road Safety Commission and provisions made for special parks for the tankers have always been shunned by the tankers. And that is another area that also has to be addressed.
All right. Baya Toyebe, we'd like to thank you for being with us this morning. We'll see you again tomorrow.
Tomorrow will be another day. Thank you for having me.
All right, it's Good Morning Nigeria. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll be dealing with Nigeria's economic outlook for 2017. This is the third part, and we're looking at the interplay involving monetary and fiscal policies.
Nigerians. Suicide bombers are not spirits. They are not ghosts. They are human beings like you and me. They live amongst us. They are your neighbors. They are your friends today, but terrorists tomorrow. So you must know your neighbor now. Security begins with you and me. Know your neighbor. Be vigilant. Be security conscious. Report suspicious persons, objects, and movements to the police and other security agencies. The security of our nation is a duty for you and me.
If you see something, say something. Nigeria unite against terrorism. This message is brought to you by the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
Certainly, Ajunwa is the Olympic champion.
We did it before and we can do it again with the new strategy through the first National Grassroots Sports Festival scheduled for Abuja, Nigeria from 22nd to 29th April 2017 to prepare Nigeria to win medals in international sporting events. The world rollout is scheduled for 20th of December 2016 at the Africa International Investment Summit and Expo at Sheraton Abuja Hotel. The Save the Life Charity Golf Tournament is scheduled for 18th of December 2016 at IBB International Golf and Country Club Abuja. NTA, the largest television network in Africa, is the broadcast partner. For sponsorship, contact the Chairman Chief Coordinator on 0809 647 0111 or Mukta on 080 330 20855. Email info@grassrootssportsfestival.com. The Grassroots Sports Festival is endorsed and in partnership with the Federal Ministry of Youth and Sports Development.
Nigeria joins the rest of the world in going digital. This means Nigeria is moving from analog terrestrial TV broadcasting to digital. Now, digital broadcasting gives you clearer pictures, crystal clear sound, and a chance for more channels and more shows to watch. Digital TV is a whole new experience for you and a rich harvest of digital demands for the nation. Come aboard, Nigeria going digital.
Coming to Abuja soon.
A special town hall meeting for youth will hold on Tuesday, December 20, 2016. Venue, Old Banquet Hall, State House, Abuja. Time, 9 a.m. All invitees are expected to gather at the Eagle Square, Abuja, by 7 a.m. to be transported to the venue. Announcer, Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
If you just joined us, the program is Good Morning Nigeria, showing live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority, the NTA. Well, as part of our conversation this morning, of course, for the past 1 week, we've been on it, taking a look at the economic projection for 2017. Well, this morning again, we're taking a look at other areas. Well, for Nigeria's economic outlook for 2017 is one that has continued to generate interest, not only to Nigerians, but also to potential investors and development institutions. While the current economic indicators fall short of the expectations of the populace, well, the year 2017, however, is one every Nigerian is looking forward to with great optimism, with the nation's 7.2 trillion budget estimates lying before the National Assembly. This is critical to achieving the projection of governments. No doubt falls on the shoulders of the monetary and fiscal authorities in initiating the right policies. How well or otherwise they play their roles will have profound impact on Nigeria's economic outlook for 2017. Well, their roles in shaping Nigeria's economic recovery and growth will dominate discussion on Good Morning Nigeria today, and that is what we're set to do. Kingsley?
All right, thank you very much there, Blessing. Now, we are being joined in the studios here in Abuja this morning by the Special Advisor to the President on Economic Matters, Dr. Adeyemi Dipeolu. Dr. Dipeolu, a pleasure to have you again on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and then we also have with us here in the studios the Director in charge of monetary policy at the Central Bank of Nigeria. He is Dr. Moses Tule. Dr. Tule, a pleasure to have you again on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you very much, Kingsley.
Okay. And then we are also joined at this time from Benin Network Studios by Professor Mike Obada. Professor Mike Obada, of course, is the former Director General of the Nigerian Center for Economic Management and Administration, as well as former President of the Nigerian Economic Society. Professor Obada, a pleasure to have you on the program this morning.
Thank you very much, Kingsley.
All right, Blessing,
Yes,
we
we
have two
also
other guests.
have joining us from our Lagos Network Center. Let's give us the pleasure again of introducing a financial and economy analyst. Well, we're yet to see him. Tilewa is expected on the program, but seated right there in the Lagos studio, just to the left hand of the screen, is Haruna Jallo. Waziri is the Executive Director of the Capital Market Division. Thank you very much for joining us on the program this morning. Okay, well, Mr. Waziri, hope you can hear us just to welcome you to the program. Kingsley, we'll start off. It's a robust plan for 2017.
Well, 2017, and gentlemen, of course, this is the third in a series of focus on Nigeria's economic outlook for 2017. We began a discussion on Thursday. There was a day after Mr. President tabled before a joint session of the National Assembly estimates for next year, in addition, of course, to the broad policy framework to govern the economy. Let's begin with the Special Advisor to the President on economic matters. What are the primary drivers anticipated for economic recovery in 2017 against the background of what some experts have described as a not too salutary performance of the 2016 budget?
Thank you very much. I think if you notice from the President's budget speech, he did emphasize that the budget was guided by principles that would be in the economic recovery and growth plan, which will be adopted before the end of this year. So in that context, the drivers for next year, I think broadly, would be first of all to restore growth. And by restoring growth, we're talking about having increased monetary and financial stability. We're talking about improving fiscal performance, and we're talking about leveraging the real sector of the economy, agriculture, manufacturing, solid minerals, services, and indeed the downstream oil and gas sector. But it also, as you would see also, focuses on investing in the Nigerian people, both through normal health and education interventions, but as well the social inclusion programs of government, including the Empower programs, the conditional cash transfers, and the like. But in addition to that, beginning to build a competitive economy in terms of the ease of doing business, as well as providing the critical infrastructure that will facilitate and enhance business operations.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Dipeolu. Now, Dr. Tule, of course, 2016 witnessed a whole lot of monetary policies as well as, of course, the fiscal policy has been there, but impacting the economy there in different ways. And also there were talks from other industry watchers of programs, policies crisscrossing one another in their different levels. Coming from the 2016 and projecting to 2017, now let's take a look at what new indicators are we going to be riding on to actually achieve a year.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think we need to understand that the monetary policy of 2017 does not have a life of its own. It's going to be strictly anchored on the program, the economic programs of the government. So it's going to strictly derive from what the government says it's going to do. If the government says we're going to inject 7.298 trillion into the economy, monetary policy will be focused on that amount of money that will be injected into the economy. And from the budget speech of Mr. President, he gave clear indication that government was working very assiduously towards policy harmonization, both fiscal, monetary policy, and trade policy. It was very clearly written there in the budget speech. So monetary policy would have to key in within that framework, but bearing in mind also that while monetary policy will work towards growth, it has a key mandate of stabilizing prices. We would not want to allow that mandate to be lost, that we would need to ensure that prices, increase in prices do not overwhelm the take-home of the average Nigerian. So essentially, I think that's going to be the focus of monetary policy in 2017.
All right, Dr. Tule, we'll come to some of the specifics of monetary policy issues that some analysts believe will need to be handled. But just to return to our Lagos Network Center, we have another guest who is there, in addition to, of course, Haruna Jallo Waziri of the Stock Exchange, a financial analyst, Tilewa Adebajo, of course, is right there. I would like to welcome at this stage of familiar face on Good Morning Nigeria. Mr. Tilewa Adebajo, a pleasure to have you again on Good Morning Nigeria.
Good morning, Nigeria, and compliments of the season.
That's right. Santa Claus is already in town, so we'll deal with that much later. But to go over to our Benin Network Center, where we earlier introduced Professor Mike Obadan. Professor Mike Obadan, from your perspective, what do you find as the key markers of the 2017 appropriation bill that the President has tabled before the National Assembly? Again, we are using the background of what is happening in 2016.
Thank you very much, Kingsley. I think the major issue that we need to take cognizance of with respect to the budget implementation is that some of the indices or drivers are outside the country's control. And the 2017 budget is predicated on growth and recovery. And that in itself is dependent on the ability to finance the 7.3 trillion naira budget. And that again depends on the performance, of the oil sector in terms of meeting the production targets of 2.2 million barrels per day, and also having fairly high and stable oil prices. And if those, expectations are met, that the country is able to, produce up to 2 million or 2.2 million barrels per day, and oil prices, stabilize at over $50 per barrel, then there will be optimism about the revenue prospects that will be available to finance the budget. If that is the case, then the major marker is public spending. To what extent will the government be able to implement the budget by spending money, particularly with respect to the capital budget? The 2016 budget, the capital component was not, quite implemented. From the president's budget speech, about 753 billion naira was released, as at October, to implement 1.8 trillion naira budget, which means that as at that time, the rate of implementation, rate of release was about 41%. But release of funds in itself does not mean execution of projects. Funds are released, how much of the funds have been cash backed, and how much of the cash backed funds have been utilized by the MDAs to implement various programs and projects, across the country, so that the key elements of growth can be stimulated. So invariably, a major marker, for the 2017 budget will be the realization of revenue expectations, the borrowing plans, and then the actual implementation, utilization of the funds to implement various capital projects, to rehabilitate infrastructure, to bring new capital projects into existence, generate income, expand employment, and then, of course, consumption. So if we're talking about recovery, recovery essentially will be predicated on public investment, private investment, consumption, and the extent of exports. These are key drivers, in recovery. If spending does not increase, then we cannot be talking about, recovery of the economy or even positive growth that we're expecting in 2017.
All right. Thank you very much there, Professor Mike Obada. Now to go over to our Lagos Network Studios, where we have two guests, Jalo Waziri as well as Tilewa Adebajo. First, beginning with Tilewa, I would like you to take a broad sweep of the 2017 appropriation. What do you find in there that it's hopeful in terms of taking a look at what the economy might yield next year?
Thank you very much, and good morning again. Well, first of all, I think it is important to put things in perspective as to where we are with this economy and where we are in terms of this budget. This budget is basically a rollover of the existing budget. As you know, this budget only started in May last year because a lot of the delays. So technically, it's just rolling over that budget into a new one, and more or less we have the same budget. But what is important for us to put into perspective is that in 3 months' time, it's going to be 2 years since this president was elected. And in 6 months' time, it's going to be 2 years since this president has been elected. So basically, he's already gone into the midterm of his tenure in a blink of an eyelid. And I think this is really where this government really needs to understand that they are under a lot of tremendous pressure. The most significant part of this budget that I saw was the fact that the JV calls have been abolished. So by abolishing the JV calls, because of course the government can no longer afford it, it's important that you now know that you are giving the IOCs the confidence they need to know they're controlling their investments to be able to make the upgrades and hopefully increase the output of crude oil production. With crude oil production, it's important that the first time Nigeria hit 2.5 million barrels of oil a day was in 1976. Since then, we have not been able to produce at over 2 million barrels a day. That will give you the state of our oil industry. So the budget for this year, the deficit has still not been financed. So we know that the Eurobond is coming up to finance that deficit and to see what we can do. But I really like to go beyond the budget. I don't really see anything wrong with the budget. The budget has been put in place on time. We have it in the National Assembly. Hopefully they should consider that, and let's get a quick turnaround time so that we avoid the mess that happened this year and we can focus on the real issues. For me, the real issues are the policies. Another interesting perspective on the budget was the fact that the Senate President said that there are 11 bills that will go in support of this budget to be able to help the recovery. It's important that we understand what those bills are and what the expansionary policies are for growth. Because at the end of the day, the budget is one thing. The most important things would be the monetary policy, the fiscal policy, the investment policy, the trade and finance policies that will help with the implementation of these budgets. That is what we want articulated so that we can get the necessary confidence that we need. For instance, the National Council on Privatization, 2 years into the Buhari government, has not been inaugurated. So are you saying that you don't want to do any privatization? Because 7 trillion cannot do the trick. The other side of this budget is that we need the foreign direct investments, we need the local direct investments, and we need to restore confidence into the system to be able to bring in the additional capital that could help us stimulate growth. And one of the key areas that the central bank has failed is with targeting inflation and foreign exchange. So those are the two critical areas that the central bank has failed and we need to correct.
All right, Mr. Devajo, thank you very much. Seated beside you there is Aruna Jallo Waziri. Yes, sir, you've listened to the other guests, and 2017, for most people, have different feelings. Let's take a look at some of your own projections as well as interventions to be worked at.
Good morning once again. I think the professor in Benin has articulated what exactly is my perspective, and there are three things. One, Nigerians were very good at putting documents together, were good at bringing thinking together and put it on paper and assume that it's going to work. Two key things that are very important are execution. We are very, very bad at execution. If we can execute, and execute are the key issues for me that we need to look at in what we have as a budget. Secondly is that, in execution, you also have to have time. Time is of essence. People have to be confident, have to have hope, and understand that things are working and are going to work along the timeline. What I see is a budget of hope, and I think it's of growth, but my biggest challenge around what typically happens is around execution. So the MDAs, like he said, have to be, well established, have to be well skilled, have to be well manned for us to be able to execute them. Because it's a different thing to say we're going to do X, Y, Z, but then how do you do it? Who does it? And what time do you do it? I think there has to be KPIs along MDAs, along all the ministers to say, look, you have X amount of time to actually execute what you said you're going to do. And then we'll hold you responsible for it. And come and report to us that, look, this is how far I've done, this is what I've done, this is what is remaining to be done. I think that, for me, is more perspective than anything. Every year I see a budget, every year I dissect it, but key to me is execution and timing of execution and who does it. Those are my own perspective around how we want to achieve 2017 in the perspective of what is being put as budget.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Jallo. Well, back to us in the Abuja studio, of course, we still have guests seated. Dr. Dikpaolu, of course, implementation of the 2016 budget was mainly hampered by so many issues, causing the different shortfalls in the projected revenue. Now, aren't we actually overbloat, let's say over-ambitious in what we're trying to do with 2017? Looking at those indications that actually hampered 2016 will still be evident for us to see.
Thank you very much. I think essentially implementation in 2016 probably suffered most from revenue shortfalls, as was said. And the revenue shortfalls were, as the president said in his speech, first quarter the prices were low. Subsequently, we had production outages. And that affected implementation a bit. One of the other factors we have to take into account in talking about implementation is the fact that, again, as alluded to, that the budget itself started late. So when we look at the 753 billion releases, we must look at them as against the start of the budget, rather than as against the start of the year. So if you take that, you would then realize that actually, again, as the president pointed out in his speeches, it's quite a substantial amount. It's true that implementation is key, and you recall that the president said in the speech that the government was going to take steps to try and fast-track some administrative processes that hampered delivery, and that he was also going to use executive orders to unlock some of the key areas in which government has found that it has slowed down implementation. But I think by and large, as you would notice, and he did say so again, work has started. You saw the 4 airports that are being rehabilitated, work has started. Work has started on the highways. I'm sure you've traveled on some of the highways already. Work was completed on the Kaduna-Idu railway. So in other words, as things begin to ramp up slowly, it will get better in terms of implementation. But in terms of the assumptions of the budget, I think, for instance, using $42.5 per barrel, I think was good planning in the sense that prices now, we hope they are sustained, would stay at around $55, $56 a barrel. So that's some leeway. We hope that is sustained. But I think critical, and again it was mentioned, that we have to sustain peace in the oil-producing regions. And I think all efforts are underway to ensure that that happens. So by and large, we should be able to overcome the revenue challenges while we also begin to tackle implementation at the root rather than superficially.
Well, stay with you, Dr. Dipa Olobe. I would like you to respond specifically to the twin issues raised by Jalo Waziri and Tilewa Adebajo in our Lagos Network studios with regard to implementation and adherence to timelines. Because, I mean, it's a point that Tilewa always canvassed on this program, that certain delays that we had at the takeoff of the administration had a knock-on impact, on investor confidence and so on and so forth. Now, is the government likely in 2017 to have firmer control over timelines for deliveries of its own agenda, particularly with regard to the economy?
Thank you very much. Again, if you look closely at that budget statement, that issue of timelines was addressed, and I alluded to it now. Now, if, for instance, your procurement law says that you must advertise for a minimum of 6 weeks, you cannot overcome that just because you want to. You have to comply with the rules and regulations. It's a legal society. So if you find that procurement processes can take up to 9 months, sometimes to get off the ground, even though you plan for it, then you have to begin to say, how do we reduce that legally? So if you want to reduce the timelines for procurement, for instance, and there was specific mention by the president, but there are also mention of things that would be used to fast-track things. For instance, I think it's called a one government rule, whereby you want to do something with government, and each agency is asking you to go and bring documents issued by another agency. Now, if you go forward and say, no, if you want to check whether I've paid my taxes or not, check with your colleague and say, is this guy on your database for those who have paid their taxes? In other words, make it easier for people to do business, but also make it easier for businesses to respond to the economic stimulus by taking away those obstacles. So the bottom line is that, yes, it's important to fast track, but you have to do so within the ambit of the law, and in doing so to say what are the constraints and how can we overcome them.
Now, do you have, I guess, still sticking with you in terms of implementation and respect for timelines, are we likely to see closer cooperation and collaboration between the executive branch and the legislative branch this time around?
I think that collaboration has always existed. If you look at the track record of this administration, even though the news tells us something different, I think by and large, when matters have been placed before the legislature for their approval, they have obliged and done their bit to support government policy. And I think going forward, we would in fact see an even closer collaboration in that regard. So I'm optimistic.
Oh, Dr. Tule, I know while Lagos guest, Tilewa, was talking, it appeared he touched on raw nerves, making mention of what central bank had done and had not been able to do to actually cash in on what 2016 budget presented. Going forward, you're permitted to actually respond to some of those areas being looked into. But what other areas would you say the monetary policy actually affected, having the full impact of economic growth in the outgoing year as we project into the new year?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think Tilewa indeed had a kind of misunderstanding of all the issues with respect to price developments in 2016. First of all, we started the year on about 9% of inflation. Now, in the first quarter, there were key reforms that took place in the economy, which he perhaps forgot to bring out very clearly. And these reforms were of no monetary nature. First of all, there was the repricing of petroleum products. There was a long long period of shortage, and there was a repricing from 87 to about 145. And then also there was the issue of electricity tariffs, which were increased. And then there was a change on the exchange rate depreciation of the naira. Now, all these three key reforms have a direct impact on price development. This way of no monetary nature. And inflation essentially is a monetary phenomenon. But these were reform actuated and they had a direct impact on prices. Now, the tools available to the central bank could not address these issues because they were reform instigated, and instantly they had an impact on prices. And then we had issues with supplies, food supplies, because the foreign exchange issues impacted importation of food and the quantum of food imports. So eventually all this fed into price developments, and we saw this spiral going on up to the end of the year. On exchange rate developments, again, he did make the allusion that the central bank wasn't able to control the depreciation in the currency. Again, we had been on this program where we had, before the reform started in June, advocated that you can't carry out exchange rate reforms on a stand-alone basis. It had to come holistically within the entire framework of reforms, macroeconomic reforms. If you just single out exchange rate reforms and carry it out as if it was a silo policy, you're not going to have the success you're expecting to have. So again, it's a matter of demand and supply. So if you have a shortage of the product, which in this case, we had a shock in oil, we didn't have enough reserves, it affected the supply in the market, and you had the pent-up demand. Of course, the price would have to go down. And once we introduced the flexible foreign exchange regime, it was inevitable that something had to go down. It's basic law of...
All right, Dr. Tule, again, this is, you just back it up to 2016, which is the outgoing year. Let's focus now on 2017. When we had one of the installments of this discussion, one of our guests, they say that 2017 will represent a battle of the rates. According to him, he's vice chair of the technical committee of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. That's Mr. Nana. He said 2017 will represent a battle of the rates, and that the convergence of this battle will be sometime around mid-year. What are the rates that we're looking at? Inflation rate currently 18.48%. And then, of course, the foreign exchange rate, CPN is saying 305. Sorry, the federal government is projecting 305 for its expenditure next year. But you also have a flexible exchange rate, and then plus unemployment rate. What are we likely to see in this battle of the rates come middle of next year?
Yeah, the chief economic advisor did make reference to the economic program agenda of the government for beginning 2016-2017. And the budget gives us indication of how much is going to be in the market. Now, if you look at, if we take it holistically, that 7.298 trillion is actually going to hit the market, and that out of that, more than 2 trillion is going to be raised from domestic sources. That's a huge amount to be raised from domestic sources. And if currently the government is borrowing at about 22%, then it certainly means that there's going to be a lot of pressure on domestic interest rate. There's no two ways about it. And then if that is going to happen, there's only one way that would happen. It's going to be either a trade-off between growth and inflation. And if you have to choose between growth and inflation, the Nigerians are giving the mandate to the central bank to stabilize prices. So certainly there is going to be emphasis on price stability, because we don't want the purchasing power to be completely eroded because of price developments. But that's just one way of injections. As interest rates rise, or as expenditure increases, there is going to be pressure on prices. Now, without corresponding increase in food production, because food production is about 50% of the components of inflation in that basket, if there is a corresponding increase in food production, definitely you expect that that will dampen price developments. And secondly, price developments in 2017 is going to ride on the back of what is already existing in 2016. So you are not going to have the kind of 17, 18, 19% inflation in 2017, but it's going to have an effect. The effect will be the legacy effect of 2016 that is going to feed into 2017. So whereas we are expecting prices to rise in 2017, it's certainly not going to be at the kind of pace that we have in 2016, because the elements of 2016, the base effect of 2016 is what we operate in 2017. So there will be price increases, no doubt about it, but certainly not at the same rate that we saw in 2016. In terms of the exchange rate, if we have improvements in terms of non-oil exports, and we are able to stabilize in terms of getting some of the loans that government is negotiating, definitely that should improve the position of external reserves. And once economic agents see that external reserves have improved, they see the figures that have improved, the kind of pressure we had in 2016, you don't expect that to come in 2017. Otherwise, if however, we are not able to get the loans we're expecting for in 2017, and we are not able to show that up in increase in external reserves, definitely it could have that impact that you see the exchange rate further depreciating. On 305, that is in the budget is a statement of intent. Even if we reach the 2017 budget, the president did indicate that 2016 budget was predicated on the price of 195, the exchange rate. But it ended up with the flexible exchange rate system being at 305. So it's a statement of intent. It's a statement of all things being equal. And in economics and the dynamic nature of society, all things never are equal. So we expect that because of the dynamics of society and because of the structure of the market itself, give or take, the naira could appreciate. It may, for whatever reasons, also maybe depreciate. So as a statement of intent, it is good to have that 305 for purposes of planning, because you need that to plan.
That's right.
Except that the inflation figure enunciated in the budget at 12.something% appears to be slightly on the low side, because if we work very hard on inflation, we will work very hard to bring it towards single digit, but perhaps our estimates within the central bank shows that we may not be hitting the 12%, but certainly we could be close to about that.
All right, Dr. Sule. All right, we'll go to our Benin Network Center now, where we still have Professor Michael Baden seated there. Now, let's take a look. We'll take a look at the cue from some of the areas raised by the CBN director here, Dr. Sule. Now, current negative growth and also high inflation numbers, of course, still continues to be of great concern towards achieving this sustainable economic growth that we're all working towards. High employment creation and low inflation. Now, let's take a view of what provisions have been made in 2017 budget estimates in this regard.
Well, thank you very much. Like Dr. Moses Tule has rightly said, the exchange rate projection for 2017 is 305 naira to $1. That in itself is not too helpful to recovery and growth, considering that in the 2016 budget it was 195 or so to the naira. And like Dr. Tule rightly said, the kind of inflation that we are having in Nigeria today is not pro-growth. It's anti-growth because it's not a monetary phenomenon. And the kind of inflation we have is rather structural, reflecting cost-push inflation. And therefore, the expectation will really be not to tighten monetary policy, because that in itself cannot help recovery. If you are tightening monetary policy, perhaps because you think that can help to manage foreign exchange demand, but at the same time, it is hurting the real sector of the economy. So if you have a policy stance that maintains very high naira-dollar exchange rate, that in itself cannot help the real sector. And secondly, the issue of interest rate policy. Dr. Tule himself mentioned that government is currently borrowing at about 22% or more. At what rate do the private sector operators borrow from the banks? Perhaps 25%, 30% or more. And that in itself, again, cannot help recovery. The economy is in a state of recession. That means that significant stimulus to production activities, economic activities, is required. And if the interest rate is very high, and the manufacturers have complained seriously about this, then there is no way they can borrow money at extant rates, invest, and make the kind of returns that will keep them in business. So in terms of policy stance, the exchange rate aspect and the monetary policy aspect reflecting the interest rate will not really be helpful to recovery, because we are expecting a situation that the economy should move from the position of current negative economic growth to positive economic growth. I believe that is the reason that government had projected perhaps 2.5% growth in 2017. Growth will come from the productive sectors of the economy. And if the productive sectors of the economy are hamstrung by policy stance reflecting unfavorable exchange rate, unfavorable interest rate, then certainly, the kind of recovery we're expecting will not happen. And we also expect that the public investment should be very, vigorously stimulated. How will that one happen? Is through the implementation of the capital budget. And you then find that, the signals that have been given now don't point to a situation whereby a sizable proportion of the capital budget, will be implemented in 2017. That signal is given by the fact that Mr. President presented the appropriation bill to the National Assembly just about 2 weeks to the beginning of a new fiscal year, January 1. And from past experience, the National Assembly could deliberate on the appropriation bill for 4 months, 5 months, or even 6 months. This has happened in the past, before passing it. And then, if that is the case, it means if the budget is passed by May or June, you just have about 4 or 5 months for capital budget implementation. The special advisor to the President on Economic Matters, even drew attention just now to some procedural issues in the area of procurement, which normally would delay, for instance, requiring advertising. And perhaps maybe some of the projects in the capital budget might not have even been designed yet or properly planned, so that implementation can take off. So one of the issues then would be, when can Nigeria align to international best practice in the area of budgeting, such that the appropriation bill is presented to the National Assembly at least 4 months to the end of the fiscal year. Deliberations are done on the bill and then passed latest by 31st December, so that by January 1, budget implementation begins. That is international best practice, which happens in many other countries. But we have not aligned ourselves to that kind of practice. And by so doing, we are saying that we are giving the impression then that, yes, the budgeting is a ritual, and, we spend the whole of the year. We don't achieve much outputs. We don't achieve much outcomes. So the policy measures that government, has, put in place in the budget, they relate to fiscal policy, spending, public spending. There's also the issue of social investment program. I think that one can also help in the area of poverty alleviation, job creation for some people, and so on and so forth. But otherwise, there are a number of signals which may not make somebody to be rather optimistic about possible outcomes of the 2017 budget.
Right, Professor Obadan, thank you very much. We'll come back to you. Now, both Jalo Waziri and Tilewa Adebajo at our Lagos Network Studios. I would like, gentlemen, both of you to also share your thoughts on the future battle of the rates for 2017. Growth rate, inflation rate, foreign exchange rate, unemployment rate. Now, take this against the background of the comment made by Dr. Tule with respect to what appears to be a hint at the somewhat extravagant proposition for domestic borrowing in 2017. He says, look, this is the rate at which government is borrowing, and then if you are having such a huge quantum of borrowing in 2017, this is the likely impact. So, gentlemen, what are your thoughts?
Let me try and put some perspective into my own thoughts around budgeting and how it affects all of those three rates. Number one, if you look at the 7.2 plus trillion naira that's been spent, about 2.3 is going to be borrowed. And then if you take that and put it aside and take the capital expenditure spending, I think it's also about 2.3 or 2.4. What it tells me is that government is going to borrow to actually finance infrastructure. Now, if your borrow rate is so high and you're financing infrastructure, there will be some kind of mismatch. But let me put it again in another perspective. I think economies are actually driven by investment, not just public investment, but also private investment. This government has to give confidence to investors that, look, investment is protected and investment is respected. And that would help in, building that infrastructure gap, or rather, what I call, narrowing that gap, because government alone cannot do it. 2.3 trillion naira is just a drop in the ocean for what is required in Nigeria. Take a look at, if you're going to build a railway from Lagos to Abuja, 2 lanes, I mean, how much would that cost? That probably is a significant amount of number. And if you look at the power sector, if you look at, roads, if you look at even something as simple as, schools and all of those, hospitals and all of that, I think, if you ask me, is that government alone cannot do it. Government has to be investment friendly. Government has to invite investors, both international and local, to actually put money in Nigeria and understand that when they put that money, it's actually going to be protected. For me, that is a very significant aspect of how to close the gaps in the rates, because when you have investment, employment rates go down. If you have investments, whether foreign or international, foreign or domestic, it puts less pressure on your currency. And there's a convergence in that. I agree with you, but again, I think government alone cannot do it. Government has to partner with private investment. Private investment is typically the drivers in economies that Professor was talking about. I think the focus should be that we should look at private investment to help support and converge those rates so that we don't have a dislocation in our economy.
All right, Tilewa, let's have your thoughts.
On what my colleague here has said about investments and confidence, restoring confidence, and what the professor has said. I think, first of all, it's very important that the government should set up a monitoring and evaluation unit along the lines of the Debt Management Office, which is an independent parastatal, probably run by private sector people in government, because this will solve that problem. I'm not too worried about the budget. I'm confident about the budget process. I think the budget has come on time. The issues have been resolved in the budget. But I think, as Waziri has said here, the budget alone cannot do it. I think a year ago, just over a year ago, I was in alignment with the central bank. But I think we have differences in our opinion. And I think those differences stem from the fact that the central bank should not put its hand up and say, well, because you have cost-push inflation, which is structural and all that, inflation. No, the central bank should target inflation. There should be inflation targeting this year so that you can restore confidence to the system and the investors. We are in the private sector. We work from a private sector perspective. The reason why I say the foreign exchange system has been mismanaged is that this so-called flexible foreign exchange system was something the central bank should have done a long time ago before the JP Morgan index, before we were removed from the index, because this was a suggestion of that. They didn't listen to that. And eventually, they did a lot of mistakes. The biggest mistake the central bank made was to attack the domiciliary accounts. In Nigeria, we have 20 trillion naira in deposits. Now, out of that 20 trillion naira, about 30% of that money was in domiciliary accounts, in foreign currency. That was what stabilized a lot of the currency in this country. You attack the domiciliary accounts, you start giving all kinds of flip-flop policy somersaults, and what happens? People move money from their dom accounts offshore. So we've lost a lot of that money. Then you bring out all these foreign exchange rules, and now we have about 4 or 5 foreign exchange systems in the country. We're all confused. So go back to we were on the same page a year ago on this, but you have not gone back and be consistent to defend this flexible exchange rate system. You have politicized the allocation of foreign exchange, and there are all kinds of allegations on the market as to who is allocating foreign exchange in the system. So when you have that kind of market-driven issues, I would tell you for free that there's a confidence issues in the markets. A lot of the foreigners that want to bring in money, they don't have that. So all I'm advising is for you to show clarity on your foreign exchange system, target inflation to restore confidence, and investments will come in. The central bank has said you are increasing rates because you want to attract the foreign investments to bring in the foreign exchange. You've done that 6 months ago. Where are the foreign investors? They're not here. So I think we need to take a clue from that. And what I think is important, as Waziri has said, is that I would like the chief economic advisor to tell us what is the privatization program of this government? When is the government going to inaugurate the National Council on Privatization, the Infrastructure Concession and Regulatory Commission? When are you going to empower them? Because there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that sector to be able to attract foreign direct investments into the privatization sector of government. Government hands are now being forced because we can no longer afford those JV calls. So we have conceded the funding of the JV calls now to the IOCs. Now we don't need to be, our hands don't need to be forced. Let us have a system. And what the government now needs to tell us, the budget, as far as I'm concerned, there's nothing wrong with the budget. The budget can be financed. We know the issues. The transparency issues are there. The finance minister has come up with a 10-point agenda. I think the explanation on all those issues are clear. Besides the budget, and I think as Waziri said, the 7.3 trillion, even the vice president attests to this, cannot do it. How are you going to create the incentives for the private sector and foreign direct investments, local direct investments, to play a role to support your 7.3 trillion budget? So those are the questions I'd like the chief economic advisor of the president to answer. If you don't answer that question, believe me, you will not get foreign direct investments or even the local people in Nigeria to have the confidence to bring out their money to invest and expand the economy.
All right, that's Tilewa Adebajo. Thank you very much. You've raised a number of points that ordinarily we would have liked Jalo Waziri to respond to. You know, that we're stimulating investment against the background of what has also been the rather dismal performance of the Nigerian capital market this year. But let's quickly go over now to return to Abuja studios to get Dr. Tule to respond to the issues that have been articulated by the other guests, as well as, of course, the economic advice, the special advisor to the president on economic matters. A number of points have been touched on. Let's take these points now, then we'll go on a short break.
Okay, Tule. Thank you very much, Kinsley. First of all, I would like to say that the policy space is a dynamic environment. So when the central bank says we've taken this policy today and tomorrow, because of the dynamics, decides to review the policy to ensure better implementation, and you count that as inconsistency, it's not very correct, because that's the essence of feedback. You provide, when people and viewers and economic agents provide feedback, policymakers have to leverage on those feedbacks to improve the policy environment. And I think that's the kind of thing that we've been doing, the dynamic policy environment. I'd like to talk about this issue of inflation targeting in 2017. Inflation targeting is a monetary policy framework. It's not just a word saying, it's not just a phrase saying target inflation in 2017. No, it's a monetary policy framework. Current monetary policy framework is monetary targeting. We've been doing this since the establishment of the bank in 1958. And we haven't changed, because for you to change from a monetary policy targeting framework to an inflation targeting framework, there are a whole lot of structures that have to be in place. If Tilewa is talking about the central bank looking more critically at inflation in 2017, it's different from saying you should do inflation targeting in 2017. The right number of countries, and there hasn't really been any new country since the global financial crisis that has adopted inflation targeting as a monetary policy targeting framework, since 2009, since the end of the global financial crisis. So what we're doing and what we tried to do in 2016 was to say, look, we cannot allow prices to keep on increasing like that. So the very one time which we tried to say, okay, let's increase the monetary policy rate from 12 to 14%, even though that was strictly within the mandate. You called us here to have discussions with the Honorable Minister of Finance, who called on the MPC to reduce interest rates. But given the fundamentals, the entire fundamentals and the basis for decision making by the Monetary Policy Committee, you can't just say, look, we are going to reduce interest rate, because you have the data and you know the implications of reducing interest rate in the midst of the kind of pressure and huge liquidity surfeit in the system on price development. So again, 2017, looking at the fundamentals, looking at the budget outlay, looking at what we expect will be the level of liquidity, certainly the central bank is bound to act appropriately to look at inflation, because this is a key mandate. But you must recall that you are tackling a stagflation phenomenon. The more the government is trying to spend to take the country out of the recession, it has impact on price development. So it's not just waving your hands and go and tackle inflation. It's easy, given the instruments that we have. We can raise the NPR to 30%. Our sister countries in the sub-region, they have NPR as high as 28%. It's as high as that. We can raise it to 60%. But what is going to be the implication of that on interest rates in the economy and on all other parameters or data that macroeconomic data that would eventually come out? So the policy space is there, but sometimes quite constrained, and analysts would have to understand that as good as their passion is, it has to be within the framework of the policy space that allows you to say, okay, this is realistic, this is not realistic. That is just what I want to say with respect to that thinking.
All right, Dr. Dipel, of course, he has looked into some of the areas. You might wish to actually raise some of those areas, touch on those areas as well. But there was a question or some areas concerning privatization policy or program from the government, and also taking a look at that, the 2017 budget as a capital outlay of about 2.24 trillion, looking at the nation's infrastructure challenge. How do we begin to prioritize what should be done, and what exactly is a privatization program as raised by Dr. Mr. Tilewa in Lagos?
Thank you very much. I'll just take two issues. I think the first, I want to comment on the inflation rate, and to say that if you look closely at the numbers, yes, the year-on-year growth has been increasing, but if you look at the month-on-month growth inflation, it has been coming down steadily. And some studies have shown that in countries such as ours, that when you have those sort of cost-pushed incidents of inflation, once your food harvest begin to come in, and I think this year has been pretty good, what you will have is a U-shaped type of response, whereby the inflation curve will begin to come down a bit slowly. So as he said earlier, Mr. Tule, that is, it should moderate a bit in the year ahead. Now, with regard to the private sector, If you look closely at the budget speech, it was suffused with references to supporting the private sector. There's no doubt that the private sector is the engine of growth. There's even no doubt that there is space where public enterprises are not being run efficiently to overcome the agency problems by sort of privatizing or divesting. But I would actually like to debate outside this room whether privatization necessarily is the panacea to a private sector-driven economy. The most successful companies in this country were not privatized. They were built by the sweat and tears of individuals who went in, saw an opportunity, and built it. So the point I want to say is that to say that only privatization will boost the private sector in this economy cannot be correct. You name the top 10 companies in this country across the sectors. They were privately driven, telecoms, banking, oil and gas. So the point really is that we mustn't go for only single solution answers. As he keeps saying, economics is about ceteris paribus conditions, if other things hold equal. So there's always so many factors influencing interplay. So I would say that the question must always be, how do we help those who have put their money in, they're sweating? How do we enable them to help boost this economy through their investment, get out of the way? That's why we have the Presidential Enabling Business Environment Council. Reduce my costs. That's why we're trying to fast-track infrastructure that sort of adds a lot to the cost of business, farmers getting their goods to the market, manufacturers getting their goods to consumers. And I think that's, you should focus on where you have maximum impact to generate growth.
So monitoring and evaluation?
Oh, monitoring and evaluation is very important. There is actually a monitoring and evaluation unit in the Ministry of Budget and National Planning, which actually is working steadily. But as one of the things that will come out in the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan is the whole idea of having delivery units, which will be tasked with specific items that they must monitor on as the year goes on. And it's not just monitoring and evaluation, but sort of working together with the implementers at every stage to say you're supposed to have done this by so time. What are your constraints? How can we help you to get it done? Because the whole idea of monitoring and evaluation at the end, if it's not done, there's nothing to evaluate. So it's now an accompaniment and going together and overcoming the obstacles, finding the resources and delivering on that basis.
All right, Dr. Odipaolu, the other guests who are still with us at the Benin Network Center in Lagos as well. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll continue with the conversation.
Chairman of all chairmen. Oh, let me wash your hand for you. Don't worry. Let me take toothpick and... Hey. According to Professor, tranquilizer.
I am disappointed, aghast, crestfallen, and vanquished at your shameful display.
This week on your award-winning comedy series, Professor John Bull, starring Kanayo Okanayo, Mercy Johnson, Queen Wokoye, Yomi Fash Lanso, Oguz Baba.
I'd like to see Mr. Udo Eto.
I hear you now, but find me something.
Are you mad?
Go.
Goodness, August, you show and your shit.
Oh.
Very nice man, generous.
Okay, anything for the guests. Maybe feature or something.
Happy weekend, sir.
Thank you.
Today is Wednesday.
Professor John Bull, this Tuesday and Friday, 8:30 to 9 p.m. on NTA Network, International, and Star Times.
I'm finished.
Who finished you? Over and out.
Welcome to the new speed of life.
Hey, red hot promo. Only puff puff.
If I win the 10 million naira, the kind correct thing we are going to arrange for you.
I go open 2 big shops. Now you make me don't recharge plenty today. I even don't collect the deal of the day where Airtel give me today.
No only ones where I recharge now. That means that you get plenty chance to win past me.
You don't see anything where I get. Let the 2 of us get. Wait a minute. Only for 4. You want marry another wife?
Joke at the joke.
Now my name be that. I win 10 million.
We don't win 10 million. You don't say the thing where you get. Now me and you get them now.
You sir. Now joke at the joke when I talk at that time.
Promo runs till end of January 2017. Airtel, the smartphone network.
It's that time of the year when we appreciate all those that meant so much to us. Our sponsors, our clients, institutions, government at all levels, corporate bodies, advertisers, religious bodies, civil society groups, political parties, business, and above all, you, our esteemed viewer. Together, we made 2016 great. Together, we shall make 2017 even greater. That's why we say thank you. Merry Christmas and prosperous New Year.
You're watching Good Morning Nigeria, and on the last stretch for the program this morning, we have some number of tweets that have come in with our viewers cashing in on the Twitter handle at NTAGMN. Now, let's take a look at some of them. From Festus Akimboyewa, says it's time for our banks to begin to trust Nigeria's local investors with uncollateralized loans. And still with Festus, CBN, Central Bank of Nigeria, must tackle high inflation and interest rates, while federal government must improve on revenue collection and spending to make up for insufficient investments.
And then we have this tweet from Sandy Michael Amakoji. So we expect full implementation of at least 70% capital projects projected in 2017 to bring back the closed companies. And then we have Chibuzo Jonathan, reduce interest rate and debt servicing to achieve the desired growth.
From Wilson Godwin, it said government should make policies that will allow small and medium-scale entrepreneurs to grow. And okay, one more.
All right, I think let's just go over back to our Lagos Network Studios. Our Lagos Network Studios, Jalo Waziri, I wanted you to make a comment earlier on how to more readily stimulate investment, local and foreign, using the capital market, for instance, as well as other sectors. That's one. And then second point is taxation. There's been some advocacy with regard to the rate of taxation. That if you seek to stimulate the economy, why don't you lower the rates, companies' income tax and other rates? What is your take on this?
Thank you, Kingsley. Let me start by saying that typically governments over the past years have not looked at capital markets as a window for wealth creation and also as an option for actually raising capital to finance either public spending or even private sector. If I tell you that since 2014 to date, the capital market has lost something like 4.7 trillion naira in terms of valuation. Now that's about 90% of 2016 budget, because if you look at 5.7 and 4.9, that's about 90%. And government is not looking at it to say, how do I get people to have confidence in bringing back money into the country? 50% of the trade done today is by foreign investors. We've seen a decline of foreign investment of about 87% in terms of what they put into the market. You ask yourself, why does that happen? Number one thing that investors tell us always is that, look, if I bring in my money, I don't know when I can take it out. I don't know how I'm going to take it out. The key question they ask us is, we understand there's a scarcity of foreign exchange. How do you allocate that foreign exchange? How transparent is it? Give me a formula so I can work with and price my risk and then be able to do it. The questions are still very unanswered. If I ask my foreign investor who has $1 billion in a custodian, the custodian cannot tell him specifically how he can get his money out when he trades. That's one aspect. Second aspect is that, we have to give these people confidence around, look, we know what we're doing. This is how we're going to do it. I heard the chief economic advisor talking about, a lot of things government is doing, looking at time that are structured in place. Let me give you an example. Okay, so I live in Ikoyi. I'm going to the VI studio. I know it's going to take me anything between 20 and 40 minutes to get to here. And if I'm going to get here at 7 o'clock, I have to plan ahead, 1 hour ahead, to be able to be here at 7 o'clock. That is the take we should. We know we have structural issues, but we should plan around those structural issues so that we give everybody confidence around two things. One, their money is safe. Two, that what we say is what we're going to do. Three, is that when we say we're going to do something, it is within the time limit that we say we do. These are the three challenges I see consistently around what's happening, in terms of how we don't see investments coming to Nigeria. And we have to look at it. 4.7 trillion is a lot of money. If you think that it's only high net worth investors that are actually putting money in the market, you're making a big mistake. Your pensions, today we have a PFA that has a significant amount of money that's put in the market. When that market goes down, it affects your pension because they are invested in that market. So when people think that the market is an elitist market, it isn't. It's actually everybody's market, and we have to really look at it. Now, even financing government, deficit. The capital market has been doing it for a very long time. I mean, all the bonds are listed in the stock exchange. What I'm saying is, let's begin to look at three things. One, when we plan, let's execute. When we execute, let's give people the confidence that we're going to execute within the time that we say we're going to. And then let's stick with timeline. If we are wrong in the timelines, let's come out and say, hey, we've missed it, but this is secondary, planning for it. I think maybe when people get to, with all due respect, get to, Abuja, maybe it's the tour or the Amala or something. I mean, they keep forgetting what is the right thing to do, and that people are actually looking at what we're doing. So it's something that has to be considered significantly if we want to actually move forward from a perspective, and especially around the scarcity of foreign exchange, how it's been allocated. Give confidence to people that the allocation is, there's a formula and it can be seen and it can be reading, rather than, up in the air and we're not sure. Those are the things that typically affect our investments. Because again, like I said, 60% of, or almost 51%, sorry, of the trading done today in the stock exchange is done by foreigners. And we can't ignore that, whether we like it or not. And secondly, the market has lost 4.7 trillion naira in the last 2 years. Something is wrong. We have to fix that.
All right, Jalo Waziri, thank you very much. You were talking about Tuwo and Amala. Tuwo is over here, and then Amala is more common with you in Lagos there. I believe you have some later this afternoon. But Tilewa Adebajo, I would like you to also share your thoughts on this. If you can take the taxation issue, that will be fine, because we are pressed for time now. But one area that I would like you to address, you seemed excited about government withdrawing from JV cash call funding. Now, the view has also been expressed that that alone deals with the upstream sector, and that one of the major sources of forex expenditure in this country has to do with the importation of refined petroleum products. Do you see any hope on the horizon with regard to value addition to crude oil production in this country by way of refining?
I think I want the chief economic advisor to address my question properly. I never told him that privatization was the only area. I asked a direct question, which I want a direct question. We need to understand that we don't have much time. Like I said earlier in the program, in 3 months' time, it would have been 2 years since the president was elected. In 6 months, the president will be in the midterm of his tenure. So the question is, after this period of time, are you going to inaugurate the National Council on Privatization? The next question is, what are your plans for concessioning? You did mention those airports that were now being planned, and you were going to concession the airports. Are you going to go ahead with that concessioning? The problem we have with importation of fuel is the fact that we don't have refineries. And the NNPC refineries are moribund and they're inefficient. So why don't you concession these refineries or privatize those refineries or sell them so that we don't have the burden of wasting money and we can save foreign exchange? These are the issues that we need to address. Taxation, as you've said earlier, is critical. If you give a tax break, of course, you might have to give up some revenue, but then you create a stimulus. The issue now in Nigeria is not to focus on revenue, but we need to focus on investments. And the problem we have with foreign exchange or demand is that we don't have refineries. And the refineries we have are inefficient, and government is just throwing money down a bottomless pit. So concession those refineries or privatize those refineries so that you remove the burden from the government. So you see, this is why I'm asking, because the economic advisor, what is the plan of government for privatization? If you don't inaugurate your National Council on Privatization, at least you can review many options for privatization. You can review options for concession. And then that way, this is where you get most of the foreign direct investment coming in. So I think the answer to the using foreign exchange to import petroleum products is very simple. You don't have refineries. So if we do not have a plan for that, we're going to start putting additional pressure on the foreign exchange market. So, and I think that, for me, is where we want to see the confidence. Because, like I said, I don't have any problem with the budget. The budget is fine. What we now need to do is to articulate the monetary policies, align it with the fiscal policies. Let's understand what your investment policies are. Let's understand what your trade policies are. Let's understand what your finance policies are. And I think, as Waziri has said, whatever structural issues we have, let's plan around them and give all the investors, both local investors and foreign direct investors, the confidence to bring in more money. Because whether we like it or not, Nigeria is still a viable economy. With all the problems we have, despite or in spite the problems we have, no power, no water, no road, this is still the largest economy in Africa of about 485 GDP. For God's sake, if we fix one thing, our GDP can hit 800 billion. And, you know, we are blessed in this country. Investors want to come into this country. The government needs to put a plan for private foreign direct investments and local direct investments and give them confidence to come in to bring in more money to support their 7 trillion budget. And let's understand that out of that 7 trillion budget, only about 2 trillion is capital. The rest of it is going to maintain a very expensive government. And we need to reduce the cost of governance. And really, that is what we need to focus on. It's not rocket science. But like I've said, there is no more time.
All right, that's Mr. Tilewa Adebajo and Haruna Jallo Waziri, who is the Executive Director of Capital Market Division of the Stock Exchange. Gentlemen, you joined us from our Lagos Network studios. We'd like to thank you for your insights. Always a delight having you on Good Morning Nigeria. All right, and then let's get the closing thoughts very briefly now from Professor Mike Obada at our Benin Network studios. Professor Mike Obada, in all of this that we've discussed, what should be the corollary responsibility of the state and local governments in order to ensure that we achieve growth, in order to ensure that there's plentiful agricultural produce on account of their own policies and initiatives?
Thank you very much. The states and local government in a federal system, have a cooperative role to play in relation to the federal government. For instance, the federal government is responsible for, formulation and implementation of macroeconomic policies, but the policies implemented and executed at the sub-national government level must complement rather than work against what the federal government is doing. And with respect to stimulating growth, we also expect them to use monetary and fiscal policies at their own level, particularly providing soft loans and then providing the enabling environment for businesses to thrive, for investors to invest, so that production in the area of agriculture, in the area of manufacturing, can be stimulated. So essentially, the states and local government being closer to the people and the various businesses have a role to support the development of thriving and growing businesses. So their policies must be targeted at helping the private sector, to realize their full potentials and contribute to the overall growth of the economy. But I think at the moment, a good number of them are not doing that. And then from what one of the guest speakers at the Lagos end said, the cost of governance, even at that level, frivolous spending and consumption still prevails. And that one prevents them from really doing the needful to help the private sector to stimulate growth and development at the local levels.
Professor Mike Obada, Professor of Economics at the University of Benin, and also former Director General of the Nigerian Center for Economic Management and Administration. Thank you very much. You joined us from our Benin Network Center. Thank you for coming on the program this morning.
With me.
To us in the Abuja studio, of course, Dr. Dikolu, briefly now, there are so many issues raised, but final thoughts.
Okay, just on the lighter note to see that I noticed that Mr. Adebayo is intent on taking Kingsley's job. But I think some of the structural issues have been addressed going forward in this budget. There was a greater effort this time to see that before you admit certain projects into the budget, you make sure that there's a greater degree of preparedness so that you're not held up by some of the delays that we experienced this year. But just to summarize, I think this is a good budget, and I'm glad that comments are coming out of there recognize that. It attempts to tackle the vulnerabilities in the economy. It attempts to leverage the multiplier effects of domestic investment. It attempts to stimulate aggregate demand through paying salaries, helping states to pay salaries, but more importantly, the conditional cash transfers, the Empower program that puts money in the hands of people who actually will spend the money, laying the foundations for long-term growth, giving historical high allocations to agriculture, providing special funds for special exporting zones to help encourage manufacturing exports, and above all, giving support to business, emphasizing the business ease of doing business, and also enhancing public service delivery. Totally. Thank you very much.
All right. That's the Special Advisor to Mr. President on Economic Matters, Dr. Adeyemi Dikpeolu. I'd like to thank you for being part of our discussion this morning.
Thank you very much.
It was a pleasure. And then the CBN Director in charge of Monetary Policy, Dr. Tule, would like you to also give us your closing thoughts very briefly and address the point raised by one of our guests at the Lagos Network Centers about the apparent, he says, lack of transparency in forex allocation. That's a concern for investors.
Please, let me make this very clear. There's no forex allocation. We've made it very clear that there's a flexible market and it's a transparent market. The market is discovering prices and it's an ongoing process. The central bank does not have the money to allocate to the market, so the market is funding itself. The presence of the central bank in that market is very, very small. So the market is discovering itself and is deepening itself. That's the framework that was released in June 2016 on the flexible foreign exchange market. Now, in terms of my closing thought, just to say that I just pick a line from the budget which the President made allusion to, and that agrees with one of the recommendations made in the communique of the last MPC in November 2016, where the MPC had counseled government to please look into the possibility of settling its contractual obligations because of the impact that has on the stability of the financial system. Government has said that it has estimated that to be about 2 trillion and is putting in place a framework to settle. I think that's in the right direction. It will stimulate aggregate demand, restart businesses, and help in stabilizing the financial system.
All right. Director, Monetary Policy, Central Bank of Nigeria, Dr. Moses Tule. Thank you very much for joining us on the program this morning as well.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
A quick check on the weather outlook for the rest of the day, and we'll be done with the program.
Good to have you join us once again. I'm Sefi Hassan Yunusa with the weather forecast from Nigerian Meteorological Agency. Fresh dust has been raised from the source region, and with the dust already in suspension, we expect it to reduce the horizontal visibility over the northern part of the country to be in the range of 2 to 3 kilometers. The central state will be sunny and hazy, while the inland will be cloudy to partly cloudy. Early morning mist is not unlikely over the coastal region, which will later be lifted to become cloud. Later in the afternoon, areas around Port Harcourt, Eket, and Yenagoa will experience localized thunderstorms, and the situation from the inland up to the north will remain the same. Have a great week ahead and stand by for temperature details.
And that's the program. Good morning, Nigeria, for today. We appreciate your company. Let's do it again tomorrow. My name is Blessing Abu. Thank you for watching.
And I'm Kingsley Osadolo. I join Blessing in thanking you for being with us today. Enjoy the rest of your day as well.
Jennifer, don't tell me you're still looking for chapters for your expo. What expo? I'm reading to pass.
Yeah, right.
I beg, we all know even if you study, the surest way to graduate in this school, that's to do a rejo.
Or better still, we hook the lecturers, Abby.
No, that's a thing of the past. I would not get a certificate I cannot defend. I would not be a burden to the nation or the society by fixing or buying certificates.